ever want to be where you got too much too fast, but you didn't get the knowledge, you didn't gain the skill, you didn't put the reps in, because then what you end up with is, I call it golden handcuffs.
Yeah.
So then you're locked in
Yeah.
because you can't, and it takes away your options because you won't be able to go into the market and compete. Like the job that you're at with all that like compensation or whatever, you're not going to be able to be competitive against the same people that are going for those roles. So then you end up stuck. And that's a terrible place to be.
So much for coming on. I'm excited to have this conversation and hear a little bit more about you. And obviously, we have a mutual friend that we were just talking about with David. Um, but I'm curious, with all these companies you've worked with, Best Buy, Verizon, Walmart, and then obviously this transition to Goosehead now. I'm curious because I think a lot of people, some people work in that corporate scene, some people work in small business, some people, there's a variety of career paths. What is it like working for these massive corporations, especially in the field of work that you're in? I just would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I think that something that's interesting to me. So again, I've worked for a lot of really large organizations, and now I'm working for Goosehead, which is obviously a little bit smaller. But the thing that I is always the same, no matter where I go, is that people think places have it figured out,
Mm,
right? Like especially like when you look, on the outside looking in, and I will tell you that, especially when it comes to talent and development, a lot of times it's not completely figured out,
sure.
right? So I think that stems from, organizations like at least historically and really up until pretty recently, I would say the last couple decades, were just focused on growth and underestimated how important people were as a resource.
Right.
So I think that that's something I've seen in common, and multiple times when I've gone into organizations, a lot of it has been, even though they're, massive in size, or like Goosehead again has had tremendous growth, is like there's this moment in time when there's this realization that if we're going to scale or if we're going to continue to be successful, we have to make this investment
Mm,
in people. And people are the most important resource, regardless of technology. And I know we're going into another, second industrial revolution with technology, but the reality is that there will still need to be people. Those jobs might look very different, but that if organizations don't make the investment and create career paths and trajectories for people, it's very costly to consistently be losing people or to not tap into the human capital that you have with you already.
right. Huh. That's really interesting. What do you like? I guess between these different corporations now at Goosehead, what are you doing to help with that process? Because I do agree. I think for so long, people weren't really prioritized in the process. It wasn't really a focus. But I think nowadays it is becoming more of a focus.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the first things that we started to do, so I've been with Goosehead now for 5 months, and this is true at other places that I've been as well, is leadership development.
Mm,
So a lot of times people think leaders need less, or oh, they're leaders, like they already have it. And so they'll start, with like their front line and the training that they need to provide to them. And I think that that's a little bit of a misstep, because we know that leadership pull through is the number one climate factor for success of anything, right? Any change, any intervention, any training that you're going to do, like you have to have leaders being as equipped, if not more,
mm,
than the individuals that are on their team. And so, what we've been doing, and what I found to be most successful, is to first pour in to your leaders, because they're the ones that you spend most of your time with, like the day in and the day out. And there's nothing, coming to a 1 day workshop or taking an online training. Those are things are going to happen. Like there'll be moments in time that takes place, but really the meat of your experience with an organization is with leadership.
mm.
And that's why they say like people leave leaders, they don't leave organizations. And so I think that making the investment there, has been a focus for me historically, but especially where I am right now, because we also have, I was telling you, we have a really young workforce, which means that we have really young leaders
Right.
as well. Right. And so, you and a lot of them are just recent college graduates. It was their first job out of college, and so they don't necessarily even have context
Right.
for what good leadership looks like,
Right.
right? Because they're all like in the same boat, in the same age, similar experiences. So that's really where we're spending a ton of time, is investing in that leader experience.
Interesting. So almost almost training the leaders of the company is
Yeah.
what
Yeah, like providing them with competencies and skills-based training.
interesting.
So, things like giving feedback,
Right.
right? How to like give feedback in a manner that is balanced and fair, while still being direct and constructive, and having it be behavioral based.
Mm,
So that was actually our first workshop last quarter, was just to focus on like coaching and feedback.
interesting. So how does one go about that? Because I think even beyond just the workforce, I think having, especially when you're working with leaders of a company, that can sometimes be maybe a tough conversation, or you're trying to, help them learn. So how do you go about that in the workforce? And I think for people listening beyond just the workforce, they might be able to kind of
Mhm.
take some input from that.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. And again, like we knew that we had to have a training moment with this workshop, or with the skills that we're trying to build, and the competencies that we're trying to like layer on top, especially as you go up into the higher echelon of leadership.
Right.
So we knew for sure that that was going to be part of it. We were going to have this learning moment. And I think a lot of times too, that's where people they stop and think like, oh, train them. Like maybe you even hear it in your organization. Well, we'll just give them training, or what they need is training.
Right.
And though training is very near and dear to my learning and development heart, the reality is that training alone doesn't change behavior to change results.
Yeah.
So when we're working on initiatives, what we really try to look at is, we know that knowledge or skill has to be part of it. So we'll have the training, but then we also look at what's available for tools and
Mm,
resources. So things that people would use in their day to day job to actually use that skill. So what are the moments, an example I'll give you with like the coaching and feedback is, we stood up templates that would be able to be used for one-on-ones.
right.
And then they model and have included, the concepts or the behaviors that we just went over. We also look to make sure that it's able to be operationalized in the systems that do exist. So an example would be, we have Workday as our HRIS. Well, then people need to know how to actually process
Mm,
those activities in Workday from a system standpoint. So we'll look at tools, templates, resources, systems. The other thing we look at is, how do we make it part of the expectation in terms of job performance? So a lot of times that's also missed, right? You just stay focused on KPIs.
right.
So this year, going into 2025, especially given the timing of the workshop we were doing related to coaching, we were able to also add to people's goals and their success measures, coaching and feedback to their team.
Mm,
So now you have not just what, which is your KPIs, right? You still have to drive the business. We're not taking that away, but we're adding, it's an and. It's what you do and it's how you do it. So that really like drives that shift and that buy-in as well, especially if it's connected to your performance.
mm,
Um, so I think, those items. And then the other piece is just the like the consistent communication and follow up on it,
yeah.
so that it becomes a muscle that you're working every day. Um, Not where you do a great workout and then you just go into atrophy
Right.
following following this workshop. So we try to really think
Mhm.
holistically across not just learning, but also tools, systems, performance success measures, communications, and just have it where you're hitting people like in all of those, forums where they digest, where they experience their work, just so it has some stickiness.
Right. Have you found that has moved the needle and, like, really helps seeing those like, having those extra tools, metrics, things to help them see their performance?
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise, again, people like they love to come to training. Most people do,
Right.
right? Especially when we're serving frontline teams, because it gives them a break
Right.
from the sometimes what can be monotonous. Um, the unfortunate thing though is a workshop, learning of any kind in any format is really the best ones will get you to like maybe some skill.
Sure.
But if you want to move people from skill in a controlled environment to mastery, where they're able to do it all the time in all circumstances in all situations, you have to have something that enables them to do that in their day to day.
Right.
Otherwise, it just becomes an event.
Sure.
And then I get the request that they need to be retrained,
Right. Right.
which is like also like training isn't free 99, right? There is a cost associated with it. Like I like to look at it as an investment, but we want to make sure that like when we have those moments that there is like carry forward and a way for people to use it in their day to day.
Right. Right. No, definitely like some sort of impact made from the training beyond just,
Exactly.
we heard something and then, we wait till the next time we hear it again. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
exactly. Yeah, or, "Oh, I remember seeing that," or, "Oh, I remember that," but, like, hasn't used it,
Right.
hasn't seen applicability since they went to the training.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So I, this is interesting because originally I thought, maybe you were like looking for talent outside of organizations. Is that part of your job as well, or are you primarily just internal?
I'm focused on internal. So once they're part of our organization, like the things that they need again in terms of we really own the entire journey as well. So everything that they need to get onboarded, right, to learn the functional parts of their job, the career progression. So we're offering career progression opportunities, continuous learning, leadership development. So once they're with us, all of their development that takes place within those four walls.
Interesting. Okay. And and what would you say? Because I think that's interesting how you mentioned a lot of these leaders are young and they're coming straight from
Mhm.
college, and so you've probably worked with a wide variety of age groups through these different
Yeah.
companies. Is there anything you notice with in this new company, things that you have to train on more, or kind of, I don't want to say deficiencies, but areas where they need a lot more help and focus versus in the past maybe it wasn't as big of a deal, just this new generation of leaders?
Yeah. So I think that there's challenges on all ends of the
Sure.
the spectrum, right? So I think what I've run into sometimes when you're dealing with really seasoned leaders or people who have had like a really diverse experience is that you can run into the challenge that people feel like they already know everything.
Right.
Like I don't need this, I already know. So that can be its own challenge. But in particular with this really young workforce, I would say the things I appreciate is there's a lot of malleability,
Mm,
right? So especially like you're not set completely in your ways or not as much, right? That might vary on a individual level. So there's this malleable element that I really enjoy. And the other thing though that is challenging is that there's not context,
mm,
so
yeah.
you can't know what you don't know.
Right.
So, a lot of times you're able to pull from participants with previous experience, or they have, like, I know how it was done at this company. But if you've never worked, in corporate America, and the only thing you really had was schooling from high school and then into college,
Yeah.
you just don't know what you don't know. All you know is what you're experiencing with where you are currently. So we do have to find ways to tap into their previous experience and knowledge and a lot of times though it's not from another corporate setting,
Right.
just so that we can have context. So a lot of times we'll use other situations that are outside of work that would have transferable knowledge or skills or applicability
Mm,
to help people, so that we're not just pulling from people's previous experience working in corporations.
right. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I guess that makes sense. It's kind of like a blank slate, but so there's like benefits to that because you get to kind of start from fresh, but not
Right.
necessarily able to pull from any experience bank or anything like
Any
that.
right, yeah, previous experience, and so another thing we'll do a lot of is, things I like to call deficit activities.
Mm,
So these are activities or things that we do, which they're intended to, with intent, fail.
okay.
Because then, that's kind of makes it more sticky too. When things go right, it's not like you have this moment where you're like, "Oh, like, I didn't know." So we'll create activities where it's, like, literally intentionally to create a deficit so that they're like, "Whoa,"
Oh, I don't know that.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, whoa, I don't know that. And it creates, buy-in, but also that it really generates a higher level of self-awareness.
Interesting. Yeah, no, failure is probably definitely a better teacher than success. You learn a little bit
Yes.
more. What's like a Give me an example of what deficit training. I don't think I've ever participated in one per se, like
Yeah.
in that type of scenario.
Sure. I'll actually give you one when I first started that was it was less about like having them have awareness on like skill and more to help them understand that what the organization had been calling training
Mhm,
was not training. So when I originally came in, the way that they had defined like training, like the team that I had was not based on the solution or deliverables that training and learning would provide. It was actually based on the amount of time that the new hires were in the business.
mhm,
So if you were 4 months or less, you were in training, which meant that you were on my team. So I would have like 150 frontline team members reporting to me, doing their job, but under training
interesting.
because they were new.
Right.
So one of the things I wanted to do is I really wanted to take the existing team along with me. So I knew that I could tell them, "Hey, this isn't training,
Mhm,
right? This is not what training is. This is, and try to like define for them like how this what is happening is actually the operation. It's because it's the same thing. It's doing the job."
right.
But instead, what I did is I took them through a series of activities where they had to go and do the research or pull it forward. So, for example, the first thing we would do is talk about all the things that training was able to currently do, but then all of the things that they weren't.
Mhm.
So, originally, when I came as well, they were only able to do new hire,
Okay.
which meant right because they weren't resourced to do continuous learning, leadership development. So they kind of start there. So then I'm like, okay, let's do another activity. What kinds of roles would we need to get all the work that isn't getting done?
Right.
And then allow them time to like go out and research, right? So they went to LinkedIn, they went to the internet, and like we're like, well, I found this role, and like all of a sudden you have 10 different titles that don't exist, right, in our
Yeah.
current environment that need to exist, right, if we're going to be a talent and development arm. And then from there, we would do like another activity where it would be like, okay, so go look at what these roles do and then look at what we're doing today. And we like mapped basically
Mhm,
the roles that they're doing today that are in these training roles, the roles that they're doing today that were actually in the operation.
mhm.
So it's like through that and it's through that and them doing it themselves that they started that like it's like a little bit of a deficit where they're like, "Oh my gosh." They're having identity crises,
Right.
right? Like literally we're like, "I think I'm having an identity crisis because like I'm training. I always like thought I was training and now I'm realizing what I'm doing is actually the operation."
Right. Very interesting. Okay. That's cool. So you're kind of putting them right in the mix and having
Yeah.
them get the experience while figuring it out. And
Yeah, and coming to the conclusion on their own.
right.
Because think about, like, again, how offensive it would have been if I would have just, come in and been like, "Nothing you're doing is training," or, "Only a portion of what you're doing." I mean, that's just, like, really offensive. What kind of buy-in could you possibly generate
Right.
for for people, like, when you just come in and tell them something versus if you take them through these activities where, again, like, the deficit is happening because they don't know what they don't know, but they're getting exposure to it through those exercises, and so, as part of that week, we left with them helping me define what would be our organization. They helped me create job profiles for what we would need to post. And so, they were really able to get buy in and get excited about what's to come instead of being, deflated and demoralized because this new lady comes in and tells us we're not training anymore.
Okay. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that they feel like they're a part of the process.
Mhm.
So that's very interesting. Did you say that you were in sales originally? Is that what you started your career in?
Yeah, so I started in sales. So I put myself through college, getting my undergrad by doing retail sales. So I was like, I worked for all the apparel brands like under the limited umbrella, and then I worked at Best Buy and went into like management there. And so it always been in sales or like retail sales or selling of some kind,
Mhm.
so that I could put myself through school. And then I actually got my undergrad in marketing and mass communications, and then I went to Best Buy corporate after getting my undergrad, and then realized I didn't want to do marketing. Speaking of identity
Right.
crisis, I, like where you spend all of this time and energy getting this undergrad and then get that entry level job in marketing, and I was like, I think I made a mistake.
What was it about marketing that you were like, this isn't for me?
So I think that with marketing in my mind, it was just this very sexy. You know what I mean? Like everything was just like very sizzle, very sexy. But when, I was first starting out, the marketing department and the role that I went into was really like doing more like end cap placement, like running access queries to determine like product purchases, product placement, end cap alignment, like how it was going to go into the stores.
Right.
And that just did not float my boat.
Mm,
I just had something very different. And I'm sure, like, again, there are marketing roles that at certain levels and certain sub teams probably do have a little bit more of that work. But I think I underestimated how much of it was less sexy
right.
and very administrative. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So,
Kind of the behind the curtain. Here's all the,
yeah.
yeah.
You only see you only see, like, the shiny,
Right.
and so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do, like, shiny. I thought it was, like, really creative, but to get there, it was just I literally was, like, spending most of my day running access queries and, talking about product positioning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you're,
I'm like, "What?"
yeah, you're like, I don't like this at all.
Yeah.
What led to the switch then from marketing to talent development? Because I guess there's maybe some similarities, maybe some things you learn, but they're quite different.
Yeah. So, because I was having my own like young 20s crisis, right?
Right.
I was like, "Oh my gosh, what did I do? I just spent all this money and all this time getting this degree, and I don't know if this is what I want to do." And so, at the time, I didn't actually even realize that training, talent, and development was a thing.
Mhm.
Like I had never heard about it. And even when I was working again with all of these, companies, when you're in the retail and when you're on the front line, you don't always realize the opportunities that exist in the corporate space, even for those same companies. And so I had just been looking online and saw a job that was like a trainer for Verizon Wireless. And I had a lot of like technology experience because again, had worked at Best Buy, so I had been a senior in their wireless department, a supervisor over their computer department, and so I just kind of was like, I'm going to throw my name in the hat. I didn't even know if I would like hear back. And I did. And what I also found out after going through that, the interview process, and it was a very different interview process than I had ever done before. Like it literally included, having to create content, having to deliver that content as part of the interview. And I found out later that they really never hired external,
Oh, wow.
right? They would usually take people, like if you were, in the retail line of business and they wanted a sales trainer, they would hire from the retail channel. Cause again, you have all that experience, you have all that exposure to, the processes, the policy, the product. So I found out much later that like it was very uncommon for an external hire. And then I just absolutely fell in love with talent. And this entire world was opened up to me that I didn't even know existed when I was pursuing my undergrad.
Oh, wow. Okay. Sorry, the computer glitched a little bit, but I think I
Oh,
caught what you said. So, um, but that is neat that you kind of transferred from marketing. And did you go back and get a degree in talent development, or was and yeah? So what did you go back and get a degree?
so I did end up pursuing my master's.
Okay.
And that's something I would recommend to any like young person. Because I know a lot of times people too are like, I'm going to get my undergrad, then I'm going to go right into my master's. But I will tell you, I'm so thankful that I had some of that work experience before going back to get my master's because it really allowed me. That's where I got to specialize.
Mm,
So I got my master's in adult learning with an emphasis on training and performance improvement. And it's nice when you get to specialize in that more advanced learning and that degree program because again you know what you know, you've
right.
had experience, you know what you like. Now it's much harder as like when you have that time where where you're working and then go decide to get your master's, but I think it was the best thing that could have happened for me because otherwise I probably would have continued down and spent another how many years and tens of thousands of dollars to get a master's degree, then it would have been real regret.
Right.
Like, yeah,
No, yeah, I think so many people dive into school and don't have any, background or experience to really know what they want. And then
right,
obviously you get into the real world and the real world experience, and the curtain opens up and you go, "Oh, that's not what I wanted at all." And
right.
so
Or
having that ground helps.
yeah, or you again didn't realize that there was something that would connect better
Right.
with your interests because you don't have exposure. So, yeah, I think it's really important to get that experience and then decide if for sure that's where you want to invest or if you want to specialize versus just going all the way through. It happened by happenstance with me, but in hindsight, I'm very glad that it did because it made it far more meaningful. That investment that I had to make in the time to get my master's.
Absolutely. No, that that totally makes sense. I think that's such a I think for people in general, that's such a valuable thing to hear, because I think people are oftentimes trying to find what their fit is, and what,
Yeah.
not only like what they're interested in, but what they're good at. And so getting some experience, then going from there, I think is always valuable. Um, what did you mentioned taking a mental health break from work, and it kind of being a transformative time where you learned a lot. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I had a really I've always been go go go. Again, really hard work was something just instilled like generationally,
Yeah.
right? In me. And so I will tell you, I feel like a lot of times my work has been so connected to my identity.
Mm,
And in hindsight, I realize that now that it was really in an unhealthy way. Uh, so the last year prior to coming to Goosehead, I had a really, just a really difficult year in terms of some employee situations that had gone on that were very difficult. I had to performance manage someone that I was really, really close to
mm,
and worked with before, which no one ever wants to. I mean, reality is, I mean, there's probably, a couple people that enjoy having to have those kinds of difficult conversations. They're, say, sadists of some sort,
right.
but no one wants to have that conversation, but certainly not with somebody that you personally care about or are invested in, for a decade.
Sure.
Um, and then that was followed by the loss of another team member
Mm,
that I was really close with, like a unexpected death. And I thought that that would be the most difficult message that I ever um, had to deliver to call, because we were a small team and like all very, very close. And then 2 days later, found out that those same individuals were losing their job.
wow.
And so I was gonna have to go deliver, yeah, a message to them based on restructuring after I just let them know that their leader that they were very close to tragically passed away. And at the same time, my husband had lost his job. And then I also found out that I was going to be impacted with a decision to have to move to Arkansas to stay with Walmart. So, over an 8 month, basically over like an 8 month time period, all of these things happened. And I was also someone who really just always was, I would say again, like kind of prideful in terms of thinking about like, I'm very resilient to change, like a lot of resiliency, like a mental toughness. And so all of that compiling really just took this immense toll on me mentally. And again, when you're so connected to your work and like you're so like have that intrinsically connected to your identity, I think it makes it even more difficult.
Right.
And so I'd never had, like never had really taken a break before. I've been working since I like 13 years old. And so that time that I was able to like, take advantage of the benefits that were available and really just hit a reset was invaluable to me. And I will tell you that like going through it, uh, I think has made me a better and more empathetic leader.
Mm,
Um, just in terms of really understanding how important like mental health is and healthy boundaries and not only setting those for myself but helping again the people who are in my stewardship like set those has been a huge feed forward for me. And I've gotten over, this idea that like that's weakness,
Mm, yeah,
which is a big hill for me to climb, right? Because I'm undoing a lot of like many years of like again being wired for hard work and like your identity being connected and just that why does anybody need a break? You've got this deep resilience to change. And so it just radically changed my worldview
yeah,
um on the importance of mental health and the importance of again setting boundaries. I think sometimes we feel like setting a boundary is a bad thing or it's going to be career limiting. And I just learned that there's a way to absolutely do that and still maintain like your professionalism and your career trajectory. But just the importance of it has been a huge lesson for me.
right. So, is there something that spurred that when obviously, you had those kind of tragic back to back to back
Yeah.
experiences and then you had a little bit of a break, but was there somebody you started listening to or learning from? Was there something you went to that got you thinking on like how did you discover that? Because I think that's so
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing was the space. Like so I've kind of like started to realize that if you change your pace, you change your space,
Oh, okay,
like
yeah,
and there's importance in that. So for me, like physically having space where there wasn't something filling it from a work perspective was really really helped a lot because I again haven't been still since, it's been 30 plus years where there has never been any time or any space that was just not filled.
yeah,
There was never a void to not be filled with work. And so that just like immensely made a difference because it gave me quiet. And quiet gives you time to reflect and to think and to heal. And then I like also like for the first time in my life started to go to therapy,
mm,
which just I'd never, I of course like was never like, oh, like people who go to therapy, but I just didn't feel like I was someone who needed to go to therapy.
sure,
And so I just think like having quiet really it can be scary. Quiet can be scary because we're so wired to want to fill it.
sure.
Like we don't want that void, right? And time to necessarily just sit in our thoughts and in our self-reflection. And so those two things just really helped me over, that several month period navigate an experience that I just can never have anticipated happening.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's I think we wanna fill that void of this like you said, the
Yeah.
silence, but that's where we kind of have the chance to think and grow, and so, okay, that makes sense. So you really kind of had that step away, and then you were
Mhm.
like, "Okay, what am" you had the time to fill that empty space with thinking about these other things.
Yeah.
How did you like therapy? Did you feel like it's been super beneficial? Would you recommend it to others?
Yeah, I absolutely would recommend it. I think you have to find the right fit.
Mm,
Right? Like there is like a like with just like with any doctor, right? Whether it's primary care or someone else, you have to have someone that you're comfortable with. I was very blessed because my daughter has been in therapy for a while. And so we were blessed to already have someone that our family knew that we trusted. But I found it completely invaluable. And I think even more so than, of course, I have like friendships. I have my marriage, my husband and I, we've been together for 17 years. There is something that is just so different in the conversation that you have with someone that you're not connected to in some other way personally that I think is also completely invaluable.
mm. Yeah, like a completely different, mindset to it that you're not used to.
Yeah. Yeah. A completely different perspective. And it also just feels like it created, at least for me, real safety in saying some of the things that you don't want to otherwise say. You don't even want to acknowledge, right? That you say them to
Sure.
yourself, let alone say them out loud. And so I think that if you can find the right fit, it really is something. Regardless, you don't have to be going through, a breakdown like I was, or like this like tragic, like series of tragedies. Having that is just very healthy, I think.
No, yeah, I totally agree. In talking to some other people as well about they've mentioned they went to therapy in some of these podcasts, and they just mentioned that a lot of times, just even the therapist being able to repeat back what they're saying
Yeah.
and them hearing it, hearing their own words back going, "Oh, okay. I think I know what I need to do now." Or self it's almost self-exploratory in some ways.
Yeah, I think that, and I think, having questions that you've not anticipated someone, where you have to kinda sit in, like, the discomfort of not knowing the answer
Right.
was, again, really helpful for me because I've been someone who always felt like I had the answer, or I was proud because, like, I, always had an answer for that. And so being in a situation where you can also, be vulnerable enough to not have the answer was, again, really so beneficial for me to feel, frankly, a little bit of discomfort.
Yeah. No, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think, yeah, I think so many people get weird about therapy because they think it's, there's a stigma that comes with it, I think, at a
Yeah,
certain level, but people realizing that it's really more about obviously finding the right person, but self-discovery, exploring who you are, taking time for yourself. And I agree. I don't think people take that into account into their health very often. The need.
I agree. I know I didn't. I know that I had completely left that space, my entire life. Uh, I was unfed in that space,
Yeah.
malnourished.
So how has that now affected how you work and you said finding that balance, you've now kind of been able to realize there's a way to still be passionate about what you're doing, work hard, be
Mhm.
disciplined, but also take time for you and focus on that as well. So what does that look like now in the workplace for you?
Yeah, so it really is about setting, like, boundaries and being firm. Not again, that doesn't mean, cruel, just, having, like, I used to just be someone who'd get sucked in
Mm,
to work. I'd be still on the phone with work calls at 8 o'clock and having it, completely impact my time with my kids, my time with my husband. And so, having, again, that space and that time really allowed me to reset my pace and to realize that, like, everything will still be there tomorrow. So I have, I've done much better about having, like, hard stops and being, very firm around those kinds of things, making sure that when I am with family, I am present,
mm,
right? Not allowing, again, that self-awareness that came through therapy, like, let me know that even if I was there physically, if my mind was still worrying on work. So, you're not taking in, everything that you can when you're, even if you're there physically.
right.
So that's really helped. And then I think also, as a leader, it's helped me see that in the people who are working for me and make sure that, again, if they're not doing it for themselves, that I'm helping them do that. And I would have completely missed that before. Like, if somebody wasn't like, hey, I need to have this,
Right.
and explicitly state it, I wouldn't have necessarily picked up, on those, like, things going on that I should be more acutely aware of to help them navigate it. In fact, it just happened. I have, a wonderful, uh, woman that works for me, on my team. And, as we were going into, Thanksgiving and Halloween and all those fall, holidays, I'd asked her, I said, I've not seen you put anything on my calendar, like, for the kids. Like, don't they have, stuff at school? And, and she was like, well, but I'm at work. And I was like, hey, like, I'm going to basically make you, like, go to your kids' stuff, right? Like, you need to do that. Cause she had also gotten carried away, right, with the pace of work and being at work. And so for the first time, she said, in like 10 years, this year she's now been taking advantage of going to, like, her kids' holiday parties or making sure that she's there for her daughter's spelling bee. And that would have gone completely, I would have completely missed that before.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't have been looking for it. I wouldn't have been mindful about it. And so I just think, again, that awareness that it created in myself has allowed me to create awareness for those that are, again, under my stewardship at work.
Right. Well, and that probably gets them to buy in even more to their work experience, I would assume.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, again, you think about, like, their employee experience, like, I mean, we did have a moment where we're both like, "I'm not crying, you're crying," because, she just, like, never felt like she had the permission to be able to do that, and so, I was, like, really thankful to be able to, again, be in the place that I was, even though it was a difficult storm to go through, to be able to start to identify those kinds of things and to pour into people in a different manner and show up as a better leader that's more empathetic and more acutely aware of what's going on, not just at work, but also that they have, personal lives as well.
Yeah. No, that's so neat. I think that's such a overlooked aspect in a lot of people's lives. And and that's cool that you were able to kind of experience that and then take it into the workforce
Yeah.
because I think I think some people go their entire lives not ever realizing that, there's that huge aspect that they might be missing, that could
Yeah.
make them so much
Yeah. It's
feel so much more
like,
complete.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Um, you mentioned that you helped some people get elected into some board positions, and I'm curious
Yeah.
about that. That's kind of a different. So yeah, explain that to me. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So it was probably, so three, yes, it is coming up on 3 years because they're actually up for reelection, this, season. So 3 years ago, just had the realization, just like everywhere else in the country, right, that there were just things going on in schools that I was not aware of. And so as things started kind of heating up at like the more local level in politics, I had the opportunity to get involved with a group that was really dedicated to focusing on getting more
Mhm.
balance on our school board. And so working, I again have all these skills that I use in corporate America, but I'd never really until then thought about how do I use my skills to like also be like part of my community.
Mm,
And again, I think that's when you don't have boundaries and like you're just like work, 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 and it's connected to your identity. Um, I didn't realize how much opportunity and how much need there is in your local community to like there's so much
sure.
that you can do. And so it just so happened for me that these board positions were like there was multiple seats that were going to be open. There were candidates that I felt like better reflected my values in terms of what I wanted to see in terms of academic excellence in the schools. And so at that time, I was able to take over running their communications and their social media and all of their like collateral, right? Like any graphics or media that they would need for
Oh
print,
wow.
for like flyers and those kinds of things. Yeah, and so we did end up successfully taking both of those seats, and as a result, I think our again like the diversity of experience that's on the board and like the balance, right, in various opinions has really made a huge difference to our local school district. But the other thing that really taught me was again how important it is to like really plug in
Mm,
to your community and to use like again the skills that you have, your God-given talents to be a good neighbor and a part of like experiencing life with the people that are around you. And so something I've told a lot of like young people as well that I'm working with is if you don't have the skills, like say you have the interest in something, but you don't have the skill for it, uh, one of the best ways to get the skill is like, again, you can get the education, but that's knowledge. But one of the best ways is to look at your local community and see where there's opportunity for you to get experience
yeah.
but through a nonprofit, through volunteering, because there is again a variety of organizations that are looking. I promise you they will take you
Yeah.
like and they will be so thankful to take you. And you then also get experience because that's kind of one of those hard things too is like people are like, well, I want this but I don't have the experience, but I can't get the experience because I don't have the experience.
Right.
So what do you do? And so I think that that's a great way for you to get skill, get experience, and also not to mention like the networking
Right.
that comes from that to be like with local people. And I think it's a little foreign. It was foreign for me until I started doing it. And I think especially for young people, it can be very foreign, especially foreign as they leave that college experience.
Right. No, yeah, I think that's so huge. There's so many opportunities out there, just like at people's fingertips. But I think a lot of people too don't value the opportunity of mentorship as nearly as much.
Yeah.
And I think you could make a good point. There's usually these nonprofits, these groups are led by older people who are have an interest. Not always older people, there's young people too, but they've had some experience themselves, and that's why they want to do good in the community. So what you mentioned that you didn't really see the need in the community before, and then you did and got exposed to it. How did you get exposed to it? Was it your local school community? What led to getting getting into it?
It was really the ruckus that was taking place on social media.
Mm,
Because again, I'm not on social media a lot, but it was loud enough that I was what's going on
sure.
here? You know what I
Yeah, yeah.
mean? And so, and then started to like really inquire again with my kids, because it also taught me that like you have to like trust but verify.
Right,
And that's true like in all things. And so it was just really, really loud on social media. And so as I started to like peel back the layers, like with my own kids, I was like, oh, like I would have never caught it because everything was online, especially like with the COVID
right.
situation. Like they were bringing home less paper,
Mm,
and so, that really was originally what caught my eye, and then as I started to, like, inspect at home, finding those things, like, alerted me, and so then really I mean, the benefit of social media is that it did allow me to connect with people who frankly were just down the road from me, but I didn't even know that these individuals were there, and it brings together, people that are like-minded, and then you start to get into, like, where you're doing things, like, face to face and locally and, like, connecting in a less virtual manner. But yeah, it was really the ruckus that was taking place. And I just had this feeling I was like, I could sit here and expect someone else to do it, someone less busy. But it's kind of one of those things like if not me, who,
right.
if not when.
Yeah,
Um, I had a little bit of that moment. And so it's really what inspired me was the connection for it being like local, knowing that there were other people that wanted to like stack hands and do something about it. And then you can't just wait for someone else to do it. I think we do that too often. We're waiting for somebody else to make the difference.
right.
Somebody else has it.
Yeah,
I'm busy. Somebody else has a better schedule. Somebody else has more flexibility,
right,
more time. So, I just had that epiphany that I was like, if it's not now, when? And then if it's not me, then who is it gonna be?
right. No, that's so true. I think people, they'll see a problem, complain about it, but then they don't want to be the ones to help fix it. And
Right,
and
and you can't fix everything,
right,
right?
sure.
So for me, it was my kids.
Yeah,
Like, the kids like, the connection to my intrinsic motivation in terms of what you decide to, like, invest your time in as well. Like, for me, it was like my children is something where I'm like, "Yeah, I'm gonna have to do something." It's gonna have to be me.
sure, right. Yeah, it's gotta be a value to what you're doing, and yeah, no, of course. Are you still involved in that kind of political sphere and helping in your community even to this day, or was it kind of that one-time experience?
Yeah, so it went, so 2 election so it was several years, like 2 election cycles, and then I decided to plug in less politically, and more just locally with the schools. So most recently had been serving, like, with my daughter's booster program. I was director for their concessions this last year, and, like, just plugging in more at the local, school level, and a lot of that was just because I know when we look at politics, we are like, we know that there's, it's like kind of crooked, like at the federal level, state level.
Sure.
But for me, it was really difficult to just at the local level when like people are your neighbor, you know what I mean, neighbors,
Yeah.
and just the nastiness of politics just was not for me.
Yeah.
Just too much vitriol.
Yeah.
And I think that it's okay for a little bit. You can probably, I mean, some people I mean, they must be wired to like
Right,
live
right. Yeah.
but that constant conflict that is just there was just really not for me. So I felt like after 2 years, I was like, okay, I definitely want to continue to plug in, but I'm going to have to do it in a different capacity just because I don't mind conflict and confrontation, but I'm definitely not someone who seeks it.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, you don't wanna live in your whole life shouldn't be revolved around the conflict. I totally, yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah, and it just got yeah, it just gets very, as everyone knows, it just gets very ugly,
Yeah,
and so I was like, I felt like I'd gone in, made the impact that I needed to make, and then it was time for me to, like, continue to, like, plug in because I had found such value in that, in terms of being part of the local community, but to do it in another capacity.
sure. Yeah, it's very interesting how people can both be trying to do good for the same group, but because you're on different
Yeah.
teams and wearing different jerseys, people get nasty and don't see that we're both groups are trying to help each other, which is it's kind of weird. I think that's more of a person. It's a person problem more than anything else, but it is weird.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, I don't wanna be, like, going to the store and having conflict, you know what I mean? Conflict, like, I just
Right,
like, that's where I just wanna go get my groceries and not have to have, like, confrontation, like, again, I don't mind confrontation, I just don't seek it out.
right. No, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Once you get I've had a couple people on the podcast before who done a bunch in politics as well, and I don't know exactly how they deal with it. I think they obviously have an interest in it, but I've noticed they almost detach a little bit from the actual issues and their involvement in it. There's almost like a detach. They have
Yeah,
to. I think that's probably what they have to do to continue to work in it.
I think so too, yeah, some people are definitely wired for it or have the ability to
Mm,
compartmentalize.
yeah, yeah. No, definitely. I think that's almost a must in that because there's just so many opinions, and a lot of nasty opinions. I might be a
Yes.
good way to put
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Um, you mentioned something I read on the questionnaire you sent me was uh, you said how you're not necessarily driven by inspiration, but discipline and hard work, and and that kind of different mentality. And I think that's we get a lot of young listeners on here, or not young, but kind of in that 20 to 30-year-old gap where they're trying to figure out life. And I think a lot of people, they turn to social media or different aspects to find motivation or inspiration, but that can be really fleeting, right? You feel inspired for, a day or an hour, but that's not going to necessarily change your behavior. And I think we've talked a little bit about that. So,
Yeah.
but I'd love to hear a little bit more of that mindset, where it comes from, how it's instilled in you, and what makes you think like that. Because I don't think everyone has that same mindset, or hasn't developed it.
Yeah, no, I think like because people always ask like what inspires you? And certainly there are things that I find inspiring,
Mhm,
but I guess like I'm not really focused on looking for an external factor
mm,
to give me the inspiration, because I do think it's fleeting and I think it's so temporal
yeah,
and then you like almost have to like go to the next thing, right, to like fill your cup. So the advice that I would give like young people, and like even when with my kids, because like we all have days where we don't feel like doing it, we don't feel like getting up, we don't feel like doing the right
right.
thing, we don't feel like going to the gym.
Yeah,
So I would say like if you can find like your secret sauce in discipline, right? Which can come through routine. And have that come from you know what I mean? Like something that's from yourself, like instead of looking externally, you're just going to find more success because when the inspiration isn't there, right, or there's not an external factor that fills your cup, you are what you have. And so I've just found that discipline and routine have allowed me to be more successful because those are things that like I'm not looking outward for it,
mm,
right? Like the buck stops with me. Um, and it's, when you don't want to do it, but you still do it, I think is how you create change.
mm,
Um, because I just think it's too much energy to go try to find inspiration elsewhere. So find what intrinsically motivates you from a goal standpoint, right? Like define what you want to be true, and then have that be what gets you out the
right,
door, puts you into action. Because it's just too fleeting if you're looking for other people. And the reality is a lot of times when they're looking to like influencers or outside sources, those people end up disappointing you because they're just human too.
right. No, absolutely. Yeah, I think people I think picking a choice or a path is scary because you could
Yeah.
be wrong, right? And rather than people realizing that life's full of wrong choices and you just kind of learn through your failures, kind of like we were talking about before, um, they look to other sources to try and tell them what they should do rather than just picking something and
Mhm.
going, I'm going to give it my all. And if I fail, but I'll change course then. And, but I think people oftentimes try to push the responsibility of choosing their path onto other people, but which maybe in the short run feels like a good idea, but in the long run, I think it leads to disappointment.
Yeah. When I just have like really talked to my kids too a lot about like my daughter, for example, she does wrestling and she just went to regionals and she ended up not moving on to state. She was eliminated in the semi quarterfinals and it was really hard,
Yeah.
right? And she's just like, I want to quit. Like, I'm done, you know? And so we have a lot of conversations about like, but what did you learn?
Mm,
What did you learn? Right? Because like you could, sure, like you could quit, but it's not going to get you to your objective, right? She wants to like wrestle
right.
in college. And it's not going to get you to state next year. And so we have a lot of conversations in our house about like, okay, but like, what did you learn? What can you do different? Like, cause like failure is only failure if you don't learn something from it.
Yeah. No, so true. Yeah. No, that's a great point. There's so many lessons that you can pull from the wins and the failures, and but yeah, I think a lot of people overlook that in the failure. They just see the defeat and don't realize that they learned so much from it. So
Yeah. And it's like we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, right? Through deficit exercise, like the things that stick with you the most are almost always when it didn't go the way you wanted it
right.
to, when it didn't go the way that you planned. Like if you look back in the Rolodex of your mind on your life, I know this is true for me, and I think it's true for most people. It was when things didn't go the way you wanted or didn't end up the way you thought that they would that sticks with you.
Mm, yeah.
Because we can take for granted, you know, like the successes because it just happened. But we're better, we're stronger, we're, you know, it's like a Daft Punk
Yeah.
song, better, stronger, faster,
Yeah.
right? From the times that things didn't go well.
Yeah. Where do you think you learned those lessons? I mean, obviously, you've had experience through your life that probably build upon that, but it sounds like even in your childhood from your parents, you kind of were
Mhm.
that discipline was instilled into you. So, where do you pull that from?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of times for me, it's been um where I had my mind set on something and like wanted it and it didn't happen. And like again, there's a reason they say hindsight is 2020 and not
Right.
foresight. Right? And so I think that when I look back on those moments, like how different your trajectory, right, could have been and not always like in the best possible way.
Right.
And so I think that like and some of this comes just with like maturity, right? Unfortunately, but I think if you can like realize early that there will be a time when the defeat makes sense even if you can't understand it in the immediate moment, like take like have some peace in that
Right.
because you know like it's not meant to be clear in the moment. It's not meant for you to like have all of the answers or to be thankful. Like I know when you're in that feeling of defeat, you're not like, oh, this is awesome, I'm gonna like love this later.
Right.
Right. And while you may not enjoy it, like if you can at least have peace in knowing that while things aren't clear in the immediate, that they will become clear later and that that will be something that you're able to feed forward. I think that that's just advice that I would give. And that's something, you know, a lot of times like my parents would instill in me as well when there was disappointment, when you didn't get the award or you didn't get selected or you didn't get the job, or the guy you liked or girl you liked didn't, you know, want you as much as you wanted them. Like there will be clarity that comes at a later
Mm,
time,
yeah.
um, for those moments. So take peace in knowing that.
Yeah. No, that I had a friend who he was an older guy, like, and he mentioned one time that there's no door that closes that doesn't open a bigger and better one in the future, and uh,
Yeah.
and that's always stuck with me just because I think I think you're right. You can't ever see. There's not really you can't see in the defeat how it's really a great thing. Um,
No.
and truthfully, it may never feel like a great thing when you look back. It still stings. But usually there's a reason why, and eventually, hopefully, you'll find that reason.
Yeah. And if you can have patience with it, know that you know what I mean? Like just have peace and have patience and it'll take you very far.
Hmm.
Because things will have clarity. Again, usually it's in hindsight. I wish that it was in
Yeah,
foresight.
that would make it a lot easier.
That would make things so much easier. But yeah, patience and peace would be my advice.
I often wonder too how much we would value things if there wasn't a tough road to get it. Because I think too often people want things to happen instantly and they get the reward, but I'm not sure how much we would value the reward as people if it came easily.
Yeah, I completely agree. I see this a lot in the workspace too, more again now I think than ever where people want more and they want, like so fast.
Right.
And again, I want to balance like having like eagerness and ambition is good, but a lot of times what I've seen happen when people get too much too fast and maybe didn't have, didn't put the reps in, right? Or didn't have like those failures is they then end up in places and positions that they're not qualified for.
Yeah.
And that is a much, again, especially if you have a younger audience, that is a terrible place to be.
Right.
You don't ever want to be where you got too much too fast, but you didn't get the knowledge, you didn't gain the skill, you didn't put the reps in, because then what you end up with is I call it golden handcuffs.
Yeah.
So then you're locked in
Yeah.
because you can't, and it takes away your options because you won't be able to go into the market and compete. Like the job that you're at with all of that, like compensation or whatever, you're not going to be able to be competitive
Right.
against the same people that are going for those roles. So then you end up stuck. And that's a terrible place to be.
Yeah.
So again, but if you like have those lessons and you have those hardships and you put in the work and you I always tell people, I'm like, I took 5 like lateral positions at work before I got like my break into the next like more senior level of leadership. And I am so thankful. Again, at the time, I was like, when's my break coming? You know what I mean? But like at the time, I couldn't appreciate it. But again, now I look back and I'm like, wow, like I have a really diverse background and I got experience and exposure and um got to do a lot of things that other people that are maybe at my same level that got things faster don't have.
Mm.
So like how much more diverse or rich is like my experience? How much more knowledge or skill do I have because I went through, 5 lateral moves before getting that break. So I think that I just see that a lot where people are like, well, I want to be a manager and then I want to be and I'm like, growth isn't just a ladder.
Right.
It's a lattice. Like look at your life, look at your career in particular, like a lattice and vertical trajectory comes, right? Those big things come, but when you get to the top, do you want to be stuck there or do you want to be where you've had so much experience, exposure and are so diverse in your background that you now have many doors open
Right.
versus just a closed door?
Right. Yeah, it can almost be you get stuck there. And well,
Yeah.
and the truth is too, if you don't have the reps or experience to back it up, the failure from the top is a lot further of a
Oh,
drop than from the bottom.
yeah. It is a further drop, and usually there's a lot more on the line,
Right.
right? So it's better again to like get it in earlier where there's, less risk financially, like probably especially if you're younger and don't have your family yet, if you're at the top and like you have the family and then you're stuck, that's a
Right.
terrible place to be. There's a lot to lose. Like you said, the drop is a much further drop,
Absolutely.
much more rough when you hit the
Yeah,
ground.
much harder to climb out of once you drop from there. Um,
Right.
One thing I find interesting is, you know, I think we as people are always eager to, like you said, move quickly. Get there fast, make it happen, and but then once we do arrive at whatever our perceived, mountaintop was, we often look back and go, "Oh, I kind of miss that
Hmm.
experience. Oh, I miss those people. Always, I said I wanted to move on from so quickly. I miss that. I always think of some of the CEOs that are at the top, or some of the experts who are at the top who go, "Yeah, I missed the climb of trying to get to where I was going." And I just think that's an interesting thing as people. that we
Yeah.
we're eager to get to where we're going, but then we, in hindsight, we often miss the journey of where we were trying to go.
Yeah, it's so hard to enjoy the now,
Hmm.
right? So again, like being not just again physically present, but really taking in the experiences that are happening in any season. I think you're right. As humans, like we're just so wired for like what's next. I like more and more, like I want higher, I want better, like
Yeah.
all of these things. And like it just can diminish, can diminish the joy that you get to experience with the current season that you're in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, speaking of experiences, I'd love to hear a little bit about your travel experiences, because you said that's a big part of your life. You love traveling, and you mentioned food and the cuisine
Oh,
and the culture, and so I'd love to hear, what are some of your favorite travels, and I just love to hear a little bit more about that.
yeah, we love to travel. And I've gotten to be really blessed to travel not only personally but also like with work and
Yeah,
professionally. So, and I'm a big believer, sometimes to my detriment, that you experience a local culture best through food.
absolutely.
Like food is just one of those things, no matter where you go, it like just unites people and there's just so many traditions around it.
Yeah.
So, um, I've enjoyed like some of my favorite places to visit are in Asia. Like I used to get to go to South Korea frequently when I was with
Oh,
Samsung.
wow.
They have their headquarters in Suwon. When I was traveling with Walmart, we would go to the Philippines and got to spend a little bit of like some layover time in Tokyo. So those, it's just my favorite places to go have always been there. And again, I am an adventurous either, but I think it's because it's so culturally different
Yeah.
than than like Western Europe or like certainly the US. And I just really I appreciate, especially in South Korea, one of the things that I appreciated so much was the respect that they have for their elders.
Yeah.
Like the just it's like a contradiction compared to what we experience here,
Right.
in terms of like how much they care about like the wisdom and the thoughts of their elders. So I just love to experience things locally in any place that we visit, be that domestic or abroad.
In like South Korea and some of these Asian countries, where how did you see the respect for elders? Like, in what settings did you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think experienced it certainly like through work, right? So we did get like the benefit again. Samsung did a nice job of giving us like pretty substantial cultural
Oh,
immersion
cool.
to like understand. So like we got visibility to like their traditions and like holidays, and those kinds of things. And so I just like I feel like you see it everywhere. Like even if you're like not there getting intentionally culturally immersed, when you're out even in the population, like there's just a um I think it's like in small things, right? Where you just notice that there's like a care
Mhm.
for like the elderly, like whether it's like their placement at a table or, the lack of frustration that you see when people are helping someone who's older instead of like just walking around them. So I think you just experience it almost through osmosis.
Right.
But we were also very lucky again to get like immersed into like their holiday traditions and different activities that they do as a family and like the multi-generational aspect of that. So, but I would say that I like really experienced it everywhere. Like even when you're going out to like, a restaurant and you can see like the engagement that like local families are having. I just really appreciate that. Or public transportation is another big one, right? Where you can like just see that there's a big difference in terms of like ensuring that like the elder takes the seat instead of the young person just sitting down. So it's in small things, but I definitely think it like is woven throughout the entire experience that I had when I was there.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it's cool to see the different values that cultures have for their, and the things that they instill in their generations.
Yeah.
Because that's obviously, I mean, I think we respect our elders here, but not nearly to the same extent. In fact, I think it's almost, you get to a certain age, it's like, well, go to the retirement home,
Yeah.
move on, you know?
Yeah, I think that that's yeah, like, that's a big thing too, like, having people cared for in their homes. Now that, you mean, you mention it, like, it's super common, like, you don't send someone away,
Right.
right? To, like, go live somewhere else, but, like, that care, like, in the family, um, I just really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, we tend to see our old people as hindrance more
Yes.
than wisdom and, people we should care for, which is I don't know
Yeah.
why that is in American culture, but, I'm not sure where that came from, but, uh, but it is interesting that we don't that's kind of a difference in our cultures. Would you say, in your travels that every time you go to a new place that you like, it broadens your, uh, view of life?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that that's really an exposure thing, right? Where it's, again, we talked a little bit about context, um, and how you can't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
So I absolutely think that, like, travel is so important to, like, expand your horizon and the way that you see the world. I will say though, the one thing, well, again, there's like cultural differences, obviously culinary differences. Something that has really stood out to me, no matter where I've gone, close or far, is that how much we are just all people.
right.
Like, like, at the end of the day, like, we're people who just, like, we hurt, we love, we cry, we laugh, and, like, so, like, even with all of our differences, it's just really started to stand out to me how, like, we're all just people. So what sometimes, we focus on what's different, but really there's so much that's the same.
Yeah. No, that's so true. Yeah, I think kind of like we were talking about earlier in the political scene, we're all on the same team, and there's like so many
Yeah,
things to find common ground with, but it's a lot easier sometimes to find the differences or
right, or to focus on, yeah.
right, and we get a little tribal and we want to team up, and but there is so much that's the same. I think that's
Yeah. And I think you see that, like, again, like, when I talk about seeing people at restaurants or whatever, like, when you go, no matter where I've gone, like, again, like, you see a parent with a child, right? Like, all parents love their children. Again, like, what's on the table might look different,
yeah,
and the clothing might be different, the holidays might be, but, like, there's just, like, some things that just unite us and, like, are make us, it's completely common because we're human.
right. Yeah, huh, that's so interesting. Yeah, it's like no matter where you go, the people are sitting down having dinner and for eating and having a good
Yeah.
time and discussing and that's yeah, huh, that's really interesting. Oh, so tricky question. If you could go anywhere, travel anywhere, and try one food, where would you go?
So I have not been to Thailand,
And
and I desperately want to go there. We're actually looking at going there as soon as the kids get out this
oh
year. So
wow,
again, I mentioned I love Asia. I've always enjoyed my travels there, but Thailand is definitely on my list.
yeah.
And in terms of food, I mean, I am always on the search for the best red curry, but I feel like that's too safe. So like, I mean, I definitely, would wanna find, like, some traditional, red Thai curry, and then I don't know, probably street food. I do, and, like, that's why I said sometimes it's regret, but, like, I feel like you have to experience local street food.
Yeah.
So, whatever that is, and probably, like, the most, like, scary looking thing is what I would have to try.
Wow. Okay, so you're very adventurous on the
Yeah,
food. Okay. Yes.
sometimes to my own demise
Yeah.
and detriment.
Yeah. Might be a rough experience after, but hey, you had the experience. That's what's important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's interesting. Okay. Well, Thailand's a cool. I've never been to Thailand, but I've heard really good things from people. So that'll be. Yeah.
I've heard great things too. It's quite a flight.
Is it?
We're looking at, yeah, yeah, it's a long, long, long couple travel days, but, I actually had friends that were there during the
Oh
tsunami,
wow.
who survived the tsunami, when they were there, so I've known a couple people that have gone, but that's next on my travel list.
Yeah. Well, you'll have to keep me updated on that.
Mm.
Kate, I had such a great time talking to you, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I'd love if because like I said, we get a fair amount of young listeners who are trying to find their path and figure out what's next, and and obviously I've learned a lot. And I think they're going to take away a lot from this podcast. But what's maybe a piece of advice you'd give those who are coming up and find their path and trying to figure out who they are? What would be a piece of advice that you'd leave them with?
Yeah. So I think I'd leave them with a couple things that we've talked about. I think the first would be that like you should enjoy like the season, like don't underestimate the season you're in. Like enjoy where you are because you'll never be there again.
Yeah.
And you don't want to have regret. Like again, look back and say like, oh, I wish I would have enjoyed that more. I wish I would have spent more time with that person. And the other piece of advice I would give related to that is that when you think about growth or you think about, like your growth mindset, again, know that like wherever you're going in your career, it's not just a ladder. Like it should be a lattice. Try different things. Sometimes you're going to go up. Sometimes you'll go to the side. Sometimes it might even feel like you're going down. And like, don't let other people's perspective of like success just being a vertical trajectory limit you because you can learn so much when you like, don't take the same pathway or that it's not just a ladder. So just, make sure that you look at your experiences through that lens.
Awesome. No, I 100% agree. And like I said, this has been fun. I've really enjoyed talking to you and find out
Yeah, me
about your
too.
background. And we have had a mutual friend in David, and I'm glad he set this up because I think people are really going to enjoy our conversation and learn a lot. So
Wonderful. I've enjoyed it too. It was such a pleasure to meet you. And please do make sure you tell my friend David that I'm no longer grinding out the gears of cars.
hey, I'll let him know, and we'll have to do this another time and hear about Thailand. That will be the next time we have you on.
Yeah. Sounds great. Thanks,
Awesome.
Matt.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate you.
Yep.
All right.
Bye.